I'd like to welcome everybody to our first Advanced Formation webinar, summer webinar. We've always been, the Institute has always tried to emphasize that teachers, in order to be effective teachers, have to themselves, especially within the Catholic tradition, have to themselves learn within that tradition and come to see how much joy and enlightenment and strength that one can draw from reading within this tradition. And so this idea that these webinars are here to help you to do that, to encourage you to read some of the works that are considered a part of the tradition, and to both our speakers and from the question and answers that we'll have afterwards. And then hopefully maybe you can find some companions in your own schools that you could talk about these works with. So we want to begin by introducing you to C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity. And though C.S. Lewis was not a Catholic, it's certainly something that Catholics have drawn much light from. And I know Dr. Hippler uses this in his teaching moral theology at Providence Academy in Minnesota, where he's been for many years, and he's the chairman of the theology department there. And also when I teach moral theology in the high school, we've been using this Mere Christianity because of its excellence in clarity and depth and accessibility. So glad to have you all here. And let me introduce briefly Dr. Hippler, who's been a friend of mine for a long, long time. Much longer, I hope, than either of us looks old enough to have known each other.
Yeah, please don't share how long we've been friends.
Yeah, we were at Thomas Aquinas College together as students, and Arthur's been one of our earliest collaborators in the Institute, and we've done a number of programs together, and so I'm very happy to have him lead us off. He's an excellent teacher, both for adults and for high school students, and I've learned much from him over the years. He's also the author of some books, The Citizens of the Heavenly Kingdom, which is
Citizens of the Heavenly City.
Heavenly City, which is a commentary on the social doctrines of the church, and also two companion books to C.S. Lewis, which are iBooks, one on the Screwtape Letters, and the other one is, Arthur?
On the Great Divorce.
On the Great Divorce. So I'm happy to let Arthur take over.
Very good. Thank you for that introduction. Very kind introduction, Andrew. And let me say a couple of things, in fact, just in light of what Andrew has said. C.S. Lewis is something that's central to what we do at Providence, which is a Catholic school. And periodically I'll have students who raise their hand and say, C.S. Lewis is an Anglican. Why do you read an Anglican so much in a Catholic religion program? And I don't usually give them this answer right away, and I perhaps put it a little more diplomatically, but I'll say to all of you, because he's the only game in town when it comes to articulating the presuppositions, that is, what it is you already have to kind of buy into for Christianity to make sense. There's nobody who's as good as C.S. Lewis. Let me key, in fact, onto the word that Andrew used, accessibility. There are a lot of the things that C.S. Lewis will talk about that I think a century earlier, John Henry Newman also talks about in more depth. But Newman is not as accessible. And certainly if you're talking to people who are just starting to think about these things or come into these things, you can't start with Newman. But more often than not, when I'm reading something in C.S. Lewis that really is kind of essential for getting the faith, it is something that comes that I think he's getting from the more, if you like, conservative or traditional side of Anglican spirituality. And you see it in someone like John Henry Newman. Well, we use a lot of Lewis, and we use Mere Christianity in the second semester for our sophomores. And let me explain its place, not just for our program, but I think more broadly in terms of what it addresses. The book is titled Mere Christianity, and that's not a title that C.S. Lewis made up. It's a title that comes from an Anglican theologian named Richard Baxter. Richard Baxter was someone in the Anglican tradition who, as much as possible, wanted the side of the kind of low church, high church divisions that there are within the Anglican communion, but wanted to emphasize the things that are common, that have been common to all Christians at all times. So he's not inventing that word. That's a word that he inherits, or a phrase that he inherits. And he makes clear in the preface that what this book is about is not being Anglican or Roman Catholic or Methodist or whatnot. I am trying to bring people into the hallway, as he calls it, of mere Christianity. In other words, imagine Christianity is kind of a house with all these different rooms: the Roman Catholic room, the Pentecostal room, the very, very quiet Amish room, the very, very rowdy charismatic room. And he says, what I'm going to do is bring you, as it were, out from the street of no religion into this house of Christianity. At that point, you're going to have to make up your mind through prayer and discernment about which room is the right room. But what I'm doing is bringing you into those basics. That's a kind of an initial misconception about mere Christianity that I think it's good to address right from the start. People see C.S. Lewis, they see that title, Mere Christianity, and they think this is a book for Christians. But Lewis makes very clear from the start, the most important service that I can do for my unbelieving neighbors is to explain and defend the beliefs and practices that have been common to nearly all Christians for all time. So he is speaking to unbelievers. He is speaking to people who maybe they grew up Christian and drifted away. That was C.S. Lewis's story. Maybe they grew up without any Christianity at all. He is trying to help these folks at least come into the hallway of Christianity. The first part of the book that we're talking about in our session today is entitled Right and Wrong as a Clue to the Meaning of the Universe. And maybe you know kids like this, or maybe you were this kind of kid. When I was in grade school, there were always kids who hated reading books. And so what they did was they read the first chapter, they read the last chapter, they read a little bit in the middle, and they wrote their book report on that. Now, of course, you've got all this stuff online, so you don't have to read it. That idea that you look at the very beginning, you look at the very start, or look at the very end, it's not a bad idea in terms of getting a sense of the as a whole. And whenever you have a chapter in Lewis, especially in Mere Christianity, he's very good in that opening paragraph about letting you know what this thing is about. Each of these chapters is an essay, is an argumentative essay that moves what he's establishing forward, step by step. So what I say that because if you look in the last chapter of the first part, Right and Wrong as a Clue to the Meaning of the Universe, I have the edition, by the way, that we use at Providence is one I have with me. It's this big edition that has, I want to say, 8 of Lewis's works in here. It has Mere Christianity, it has Miracles, The Great Divorce, Problem of Pain, and recently they added the 4 Loves. And you can get this, through like Barnes and Nobles or Amazon for about $23 or so. We have our sophomores buy it, and then they use it for the next 3 years, paying for your buck. But anyway, if you have this, it happen to have this edition. It's toward the end of this chapter 5, and Right and Wrong is Clue to the Meaning of the Universe, where he kind of wraps up what he's been doing. He says, it is after you have realized that there is a real moral law and a power behind the law, and that you have broken the law and put yourself wrong with that power. It is after this, and not a moment sooner, that Christianity begins to talk. Okay? So that's what these first 5 chapters of Mere Christianity are establishing. There's a moral law. There's some kind of power behind that law. We're breaking that law. We're making ourselves enemies to that power. What Lewis is pointing out is those are kind of the starting points of where Christianity begins. Lewis in the 1940s is already looking out at a world in which people have less and less of a sense of those realities. There being some kind of moral law that's written on the heart, or as we tend to say in the Catholic world, a natural law written on the heart. They tend to be less and less open to that. So what he does for the first several chapters is establish this moral law, and not only establish it through argument, but also respond to common objections. Then in the final chapter, what he does is takes the fact that we rebel against this law, and what does that tell us about our situation? So let's start at the beginning. The opening chapter in this section is called "The Law of Human Nature," and I would say probably about six that establish standard based on human nature for right and wrong. He will start from very ordinary things, like the fact that we bicker. And he points out that the bickering may mean that we disagree about this or that, but the bickering is always going to go back to some kind of standard. Okay? You can start from very ordinary things like that, and he will move on to arguing how it is that when you look across culture, whether you're talking about ancient cultures, modern culture, Eastern, Western, they all have common standards for bravery, for justice, for honoring parents, for loving spouses, for nurturing children. When you look out at the world, they have all sorts of disagreements about specifics. But if you're talking about the basics of human life, those are all over the place. One of the more memorable passages in that section is where he points out, try to imagine a society where they tried to live out the very opposite of all the things that we would sort of recognize as like the Ten Commandments. Be cowardly, be treacherous. This is a society that wouldn't make it to the end of the week. The reason that you keep coming up to these same basic commands is because they're fundamental to human life. Now, I have to say, this is so important for the high school students that I teach, because almost all those students come in as moral relativists. They take in the moral relativism from the atmosphere around them. So that's not a chapter that I can do very slow. That's something that takes a while. And I think for a lot of our young people, straight up through college and even into graduate school, that's something that's almost embedded into their understanding of the world. Where Lewis goes next is he raises various objections against that law of human nature. So in fact, the very next chapter is called Some Objections, and he tackles two there. One is that what we call the moral law is really herd instinct. And he uses the expression herd instinct. I think what this goes back to is Charles Darwin's Descent of Man. Darwin uses the term social instinct. But the position basically amounts to what you are calling morality or this natural law is really just this programming that we have as animals, and all the animals have it. So bees in a hive, or birds in a flock, or sheep in a herd, they all have this programming that allows them to act socially with each other. And so what you're calling morality isn't some kind of mystical thing from above. It's this programming that we have biologically. And what Lewis does in a series of arguments is points out that what we call morality is not just instinct, it's not just desire. There's this additional thing that has to come along. So in other words, you may have the feeling from your herd instinct that you should save somebody who's in danger. But it isn't just the feeling, it's this command that you should go save them. In other words, you could always ask the question, why should I follow my instinct? If my instinct is telling me to do something I don't want to do, why should I follow it? There's got to be something above and beyond the instinct. Likewise, he says, there are times where the right instinct is actually the weaker instinct. When you look at animals, whatever their stronger desire is, that's what they follow. But with human beings, you might have an instinct that you recognize as the right one, and now you've got to make it stronger than it really is. Um, Again, you're in the realm of talking about something that is over and above instinct. There's some third thing. Finally, he talks about how it is that really, if morality were the same as instinct, then you would be able to point to one instinct or another and say that that instinct was good just by itself, or perhaps that an instinct is bad by itself. But of course, that's not the case. Some instincts are good at some times and they're bad at other times. It could be that aggression in all sorts of circumstances is something that needs to be controlled. If your life is in danger or you're in a situation of threat, you've got to get your aggression going. Aggression is not something that by itself is good or bad. So that's the thing that, again, when people want to say that morality is something biological or it's evolutionary, you can go online and without any difficulty at all, every year, BBC Nature or Smithsonian is going to have some article about learning about human morality from chimpanzees or orangutans or gorillas. They have all these social interactions, they respect each other, they care for each other. That doesn't describe what morality is, because morality is not just that you feel like doing it or that your instincts are directing you to. It means you're doing it even when you don't feel like it. You're doing it because you have some judgment about it being right. It isn't simply being guided by some natural. The next objection that he considers, again, another fairly common one, is that what we call morality is simply a social convention. In other words, it's just what it is that we're raised with or brought up with. And he says, the mistake that people are making here is they think that whatever it is you're brought up with is a social convention. Well, as he points out, of course, people are brought up with math classes. Algebra doesn't become a social convention because you're taught it in school. The multiplication tables don't become a social convention because you're taught it in school. Of course, the next point that someone's going to make is, well, but how is morality like math? How is it, something that's objective? Well, if they're learning the same times tables in, Mexico that they're learning in Canada, that they're learning in Israel, that they're learning in Japan, that's a reason to think that you're talking about something natural. Likewise, if you're talking about the basics of morality, if children are being taught to be brave and just and generous in Mexico and in Canada and in Israel and Japan, that's a reason to think that you're talking about something which is not just a convention. Now, how you carry out things like, let's say, politeness is going to be different among those countries. But that you should be polite, that you should treat people with some signs of respect. That's again another fairly common one, because I know, especially with my students, they without knowing what the phrase is, they fall into being cultural relativists and even cultural determinists. That is, they think that whatever people are raised with, that's what they believe, that's what they accept. I noticed that my students always seem to accept themselves. They don't think they're determined, but somehow all these other people for human history and on the other side of the planet, they're all determined. What I tell my students is, if children are determined by their upbringing, why can't I get my kids to remember to turn off the lights when they leave a room? Evidently, that determination isn't working out for me as a parent. If you look at the next chapter, this is the chapter that I think is the hardest of the group. It's called the reality of the law. And what it is that Lewis points out is there are people who want to dismiss the natural law or the moral law because for them, if something isn't real the way that a physical thing is real, then it can't be real. So if you look at gravity, you have laws that describe it. You drop things, they fall. It all happens necessarily. So that's what a law should work like, work necessarily. But of course, with morality, it doesn't work that way. There People sort of know that stealing is wrong and they steal. They know that lying is wrong and they lie. They know that killing is wrong as they kill. So the objector would ask, well, how can this thing be real if it isn't working necessarily all the time? And the point that Lewis makes is that, when people deny this, they have to explain morality somehow. So what they try to do is explain human action the same way that you explain the action of non-living things. So couldn't I say that when human beings are good or bad, good and bad means the same thing that would mean for non-living things? Like when I talk about a rock being a good rock, well, this would be good for my border outside. It's useful to me. Or when I talk about a tree being a bad tree, it's not giving me the shade I want, right? It's not useful to me, or it's harmful in some way. So couldn't I just say the behaviors that I call good for human beings are useful ones? Couldn't I say that the behaviors that are bad are sort of harmful ones? So in other words, now I have something that I can describe. Non-living things, living things, rational things, I can all use the same description. I don't have to use some kind of natural law or moral law. What Lewis points out is that it's simply not the case that what we call good is always what is useful, and what we call bad is always what we call harmful. You can have people, for example, who are working for the enemy in wartime, and they're selling you information. They're traitors. You may consider them useful, but you don't consider them good. They're doing what they do for a buck. Conversely, as let's say you're on a train or a bus, and you you try to get a seat. Someone gets in ahead of you. Okay, you've lost the seat. You don't necessarily think the person's bad. Change the example a little bit. Let's say you set your bag down, you turn around and you come back, and someone has now moved your bag and sat down in your place. Either way, the result is the same. You've lost your seat. For the first person, it happened by accident. The second one, they took it from you. He also has this other example that, let's say if I'm walking along and I get tripped. If the person didn't intend to trip me, it helps me pick up my stuff, I'm not going to think there's any kind of badness going on. Change the example. Let's say I'm walking along and I look down and somebody's sticking out their leg trying to trip me. Even though I don't trip because I see the leg in time, I'm going to think that person is very bad indeed, even though there's no harm I did. Nothing has fallen. And that's what Lewis uses that to point out good and evil are not just in the results. Good and evil are also in the intention. And in fact, they begin in the intention. You also have to look at results. But it's because, in other words, rational agents like us have mind and will. Rational agents have mind and will. So that's why it is that you simply can't describe good and evil the way you would describe, or good and bad, the way you describe it for trees or rocks or your pet. Human beings have mind and will in a way that those things don't. So notice in a way what he's done here. He's not just responded to objections, but he's showing you that good and evil are something beyond the visible world in the way we understand it. In other words, good and evil can't be something that is explained biologically. It can't be explained as some sort of instinct that we share in common with the animals. It can't be explained sociologically, if you like. It can't be explained as something that's just part of our upbringing and our social environment. And now it can't be explained, what would be another term here? It can't be explained in terms of just some sort of social utility. It can't be explained, if you like, almost economically. It can't be explained as some sort of mutual advantage. Good and evil imply knowledge, and they imply the will in a way that none of those things adequately address. From there, what Lewis argues is that from what we've gotten so far, what does this tell us about the kind of universe we live in? Because he says, I'm not just talking about human beings, I'm talking about the universe. Well, if you look at human history, there are these two different views about the world. One you might call the materialist view, the other the religious view. And he's painting with a very broad brush here. By materialist, he means not people who care about clothes and cars and popularity and whatnot. He means people who deny that there's anything spiritual or non-material. In other words, there's no such thing as soul or mind or God or spirits. None of that exists. If it's not on the periodic table of elements or some combination thereof. And so therefore the universe, as we experience it, come about through necessary laws and chance. Okay, those two things, necessary laws. Um, on the other hand, the religious view, again, using this word very, very broadly, is that there is something out there that has given the universe a purpose. The universe is not just a universe from chance. The reason there are planets and stars and life and intelligent beings like us is because that being itself has intelligence and in a long process has intended that there are beings like him. Now, how would you know which view was right? Lewis points out you couldn't do that using science because science only deals with what it is that you can see and experiment with. And what if there's a meaning or a purpose to the universe, that's not something you're going to see. That's not something you're going to is going to be evident in a kind of experimental way. Well, if you're not going to find it out that way, what are you going to use? What other information do you have? Well, the other information you have is the moral law, because that's not something experiential. That's something experimental. When you look out at the world, what you see is people being honest and being dishonest, people respecting life and people abusing it, people being faithful and people being faithless. The way that you know there's a moral law is these self-evident commands in the mind. It's not from what it is you see, because you see it all over the place. So he argues from that, well, if this were a universe that had some kind of purpose and meaning, how would it make itself evident if it's not going to be sort of evident to your eyesight, senses? Well, if this really was a universe with a purpose and meaning, it would make itself known to you from the inside. It would make itself known to you as some kind of inner influence and command, trying to get you to act a certain way. Okay, well, is there anything out there like that? Well, yes, the moral law. You have something in your mind and will trying to get you to act a certain way. That is a reason to think that there is some kind of mind out there. And for the other things that you can't get inside of, you can infer that there must be something out there acting on them as well. So he gives this analogy. If I look out and I see the postman delivering envelopes, I don't know what's in the envelopes. Federal law prevents me from going into my neighbor's mailboxes. I really shouldn't be doing that sort of thing. But if I look at my own mail and what I see are bills and credit card offers and advertisements for the new takeout Chinese place, I can reasonably infer that my neighbors are getting similar mail. Likewise, since I, as a human being, am being directed from the inside by this moral law, I can look at other natural things, the animals, the plants, the rocks, and infer that somehow they're getting directed too, although they're getting directed in a different way. So notice what Lewis has accomplished so far. He's argued that there's a moral law. He's argued that moral law is not something that's explainable by uh, biology or by just human society or by kind of collective utility. And now he's argued that there's some kind of mind behind that law. What he then does in that final chapter is argue that, what do we know about this power just from the moral law? We know that this is a power that is intensely concerned about goodness. That in fact, this is a power that would be absolutely good. But you wouldn't know just from the moral law that this was a personal being. You wouldn't know that he was a loving being. You wouldn't know that he was a forgiving being. What you've got is a being that has given you a law that, if you are honest with yourself, you would have to admit that you break all the time. And therefore, the logical inference would be that you are offending that being by how you act at every hour and every day. And so then that creates a problem, which is the basic problem not of Christianity, but it's the basic problem of religion. How are you going to reconcile yourself to that being? How are you going to reconcile yourself to that being? How are you going to be able to harmonize your own behavior and your own actions with a being who expects you to act differently in the way you do? And that's where he concludes. He concludes with that problem, because then what he will address in the next part of Mere Christianity is what Christians believe. And he's going to argue that Christianity solves that problem better than any of its competitors. How is it you are going to reconcile man who has this moral law in his heart and breaks it with the being who is the author of that law? Let me just conclude this overview with an observation from The Problem of Pain. Problem of Pain was a book that C.S. Lewis wrote 10 years earlier, like a little over 10 years earlier, and it's the first apologetic book that he wrote. It's the book, in fact, that got him the Mere Christianity talks on BBC Radio. Remember, that's how Mere Christianity started. It started as a series of talks on BBC Radio, and then later was turned into a book. But in The Problem of Pain, it's this chapter on human wickedness. I think it's chapter 4. He talks about how it is that when the apostles preached, they preached to a world that knew that human beings were sinners. So when you think of John the Baptist, repent and believe the gospel. Repent, for the kingdom of God is at hand. Think even earlier. Lewis doesn't use this example, but it's the one I always use when I'm talking to high schoolers about it. When Jonah goes to Nineveh and says 40 days and Nineveh will be destroyed, the Ninevites don't say, I can't believe in a God like that. I believe in a God of love and compassion. That is not what the Ninevites do. They wear sackcloth and ashes. They even make the animals fast. And from the king all the way down to the simplest beast. And they have the idea, if he sees that we're sorry, maybe God will repent. Lewis is saying that is the natural attitude of the human race in light of these realities, that there's a law, that we break it, and therefore we are offending the being out there that wrote that law in our hearts. The reason that I use it at Providence, and the reason that I use it really at every opportunity, this is so fundamental to evangelization, and it's the thing that's for so many of our modern people is so hard to get. Generally, even though the law is written on the heart, there are all sorts of ways in which you can kind of be trained out of that, or trained to doubt it, or trained to disbelieve it. But if you don't have the idea that there's this law written on your heart that you're breaking, you are missing the most basic piece of being able to come to the gospel. Sometimes I will tell my high schoolers toward the end of the class, once they've got a little more of this under their belt, if you don't have that there's some kind of moral law that's written on the heart, it's not just that you have an obstacle to Christianity. You are not in the neighborhood of a world religion. There isn't a world religion that's going to make sense to you unless you get that basic point. So that's a good place to stop. Questions, objections, outrage. What's ever on your mind? I think, Andrew, they're going to be chatting with you. They'll type it up, put it in a chat, and
or go ahead
read
and
it to me.
start speaking, and if we have chaos, I'll start to organize. You can
Yeah,
unmute
very
your mic,
good,
or you
very
can-
good.
we should, I don't know if I mentioned this, but you can see we've been recording this, so it will be shared, we hope, with others, but don't let that prevent you from asking questions or making comments.
Just a quick thanks. This is such a powerful text. I haven't read it in 20 years, but it just draws so many key points. Like if you aren't aware of sin, then you're not in the field of any world religion. That's something that's a message that we need to hear, not so that the church is preoccupied with sin, but so that people are facing God with contrition. And it's hard to speak into that. So
Yeah.
Lewis is brave and gives us a good platform to reflect on.
Yep, I agree. You don't want to become the Jansenist church, but on the other hand, I feel as though we're almost at the opposite extreme. It's very difficult for my teenage students that I have, even to use the word sin. They use mistakes, mess ups, slip ups, and I said, look, mistakes, mess ups, that's when you knock the Cheerio box off the cabinet onto the floor and you have a kitchen full of Cheerios. Jesus did not came to save you from the Cheerios on the floor. He came to save you from the things that are wrong, that are are wrong, that are gravely wrong. That's what he came to save you. Pardon me.
Can I ask a question from I'm from the UK, so I'm slightly struggling with even basic terms like sophomore. I'm really sorry. I think you mentioned that you take quite a while over. I think it was chapter 1 with your students. So what does that mean in practice? How do you teach the text? Is this do you use a particular technique, or does it vary from class to class?
When I teach C.S. Lewis to 16-year-olds, I go paragraph by paragraph. I make them look up words. I have dictionaries scattered about the room. I make them look up the words when they don't know the words. I chart out what the argument is on the board. We have a marker board, and I'll put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'll talk about what each kind of argument is. So in other words, I go slow. When we do for you in 30 minutes, we spend a month. We spend 4 weeks. We basically do a chapter a week. And then when we do the next part of Mere Christianity Part 2, that's another month. But that's because I am dealing with students who overwhelmingly are relativists. When I say overwhelmingly, I mean over 90% of them are going to tell me that moral judgments are opinions. There's nothing factual.
These are Catholic students.
They are.
Yeah.
They're Catholic students who've been in Catholic school oftentimes since pre-K. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because that's the environment. That's their music. That's their movies. That's their public school friends. That's the culture around them. You cannot overestimate the degree to which kids start to see their religion as something that just belongs to the little village in which they live, and it's sort of like they don't know how to square it with the wider world. And so a lot of times the way they square it is, well, this is true for us, or I believe this because it's like I belong to the club. They don't see that what the church is teaching them is something universal that pertains to the human race. So it's a tough position for them to be in. Anyway, but back to the gentleman's question. So how do I teach it? Paragraph by paragraph, going over what the argument is, what he's saying, why he's saying it, how the argument works together, and we go real slow.
Great, thank you.
I love the way that what you mentioned about you look at these universal rules that seem to hold true for every religion, and then you turn it around and say, what would the world be, or what would people be like if they believed the opposite was right?
Yep.
That's strong. Yeah. I mean, his whole argument is fabulous. I love it.
And for young people, they just don't see that. they don't see that there are any consequences to moral errors. They think that morality is a realm where it almost like doesn't matter what you believe, nothing happens. And so you have to kind of bring them back to reality. That's what C.S. Lewis helps do, is bring them back to reality. Because think about the TV shows they watch. They watch all these shows where people are immoral all day long, and nothing really happens. Nothing bad happens. These are just lifestyle choices. And you live one way, and you could be equally happily living the opposite.
Thanks. This really insightful kind of summary, as much as you can get to, and you cover one chapter in a month, and as much as we can cover in 30-40 minutes. But one thing that kind of struck me is that you were saying that, like, the early disciples in the early church, I think most early religions, were preaching to a world that knew they were sinners. So as in, like, Nineveh and early folks, early societies had an awareness of that law. And if we don't have that awareness, well, then we can't really come to understand any religion, let alone Christianity, in any sufficient way. And then we just spoke about how now students, Catholic, Christian, atheist, are inundated with a negation of that moral law. So like they're coming in complete relativists.
Yep.
And so I guess I'm wondering how you politely but firmly and apologetically address that I guess dissonance that's there. That early religion and this book and a number of other texts are useful and these stories are useful in a sense that there was a culture that knew they were sinners. If this culture doesn't know that they are sinners, or that sinners necessarily exist, or that sinners are anything beyond what you feel, how do you kind of get them to shift without, I guess, alienating them? Because for a teenager to basically hear that everything you knew is wrong, that's what they're going to go to. How do you kind of broach that piece?
Now, by the way, it's fun. Let me just take the last thing you said real quick. There was a young woman I wrote a letter of recommendation for when she was a senior, for going off to college. And in the information she provided me, we give them these little worksheets, and they give us sort of background on what the experience was in their class and so on. And the thing she wrote for me was, during the first month of moral theology, where you taught us that moral relativism was wrong, I was confused for a month, for a solid month. I just felt totally disoriented. And it's almost like the way you send off a kid, and you've tried the best you can to have them be Catholic, and then they go to the school and their theology class teaches them either there is no God, or there is no church, or Jesus never rose from the dead, or miracles don't happen. They feel this. Well, that's almost like this girl finding out that moral relativism is true. She feels totally disoriented. So you're right, it doesn't go down easy. And I would say that it's not like I do a unit on the natural law or something like this. This is something that takes all year long, the whole year. It takes all year. So 8 months, 9 months. By the end of that, I think most of those students give up their relativism, but it takes all year. So what do I use? In that first month, I'll just be brief, because you're almost asked, that's almost a talk unto itself. But 3 of the things that I use: 1, at the back of C.S. Lewis's Abolition of Man, that little book, The Abolition of Man, is this thing called the Illustrations of the Tao. And what it is a collection of moral commands from cultures all over the world. Egypt, Babylonia, Jews, Greeks, American Indians, Australian Aborigines. But what Lewis is showing is that you see the same pattern of moral commands all over the world. Again, not the specifics. There's polygamy and monogamy and capital punishment and whatnot. But if you're talking about the basics of things like justice and bravery and loyalty and so on, that they're the same all over the place, because there's a single human nature. That's all over the place. So that's something I use, and that's something that it's kind of, in a way, they recognize it because they've seen it in their history classes, but they haven't connected the dots. And the abolition of man allows them to connect the dots. Second, I have him read this short thing by an anthropologist, Robert Edgerton. The book is called Sick Societies. Very provocative in anthropology to have a book title on it. But there's a chapter in the book called From Discontent to Rebellion. I think it's the chapter. And he talks about all of these people. He has things like human sacrifice and widow burning, sati, if you're familiar with that, from India, cannibalism, constant war, forms of violent societies where they're constantly at war. And there are always people within these societies who rebel. There are always people who, they've been raised with widow burning and they don't want to burn on the funeral pyre. They grow up in a cannibalistic society and the thought of even eating human flesh just disgusts them. And again, it allows you to get at there being some kind of human nature, that culture is not everything. And then finally, we spend a week reading the letter from a Birmingham jail. And especially in the climate that we live in, where racial sensitivity is very heightened, the letter from a Birmingham jail is really powerful, because Lewis's argument against racism is based on the natural law. And I am very, very comfortable jacking up my sort of left of center progressive students who want to be relativists. If you really think racism is an evil, then it's an evil. That it's not like evil for you, not evil for you. I am fine with kids graduating from Providence, left of center, being progressives. They want to be social justice warriors, fine. But please base it on the natural law. Base it on there being a law which is on our nature, and that there are goods for our nature, which these things that we call injustice violate. Okay? Whatever, there are reasonable criticisms of Dr. King. Dr. King is not a relativist, and you can't make any sense of that letter from Birmingham jail. Relativist. Those are things that I use in the first month, and it helps to set a tone. But it's almost like you've got to say to yourself, there are all sorts of things I could teach and could make as priorities. If this is something that I think is really important, then that's what this year is about. And all the particular things that I do are going to, in some way, shape, or form, come back to it. But that's just something that, as a teacher, or as whether you're working in a school or in a parish or whatever it is you're doing, you need to be crystal clear about. You can't just be, we're going to do a unit on relativism, or we're going to do a unit on the, don't bother. If you think somehow you're going to tackle it with a unit, don't bother. This is an all year thing. This is all year.
Thanks. That's really useful. Appreciate it.
Good.
Natalie, could you mind voicing some of the stuff you've been chatting about?
We've been chatting a little bit about, Dan mentioned, Dan, your entry point to the conversation was,
basically, if they're all relativists and they're in this steeped in this culture of relativism, how do you bridge that gap to teaching the truth?
Right. I've been doing a little bit of study on the proclaiming the Kerygma, so that's kind of my first go-to. It may not be commonplace for children to know the 4 parts of the Kerygma and be able to sum up the gospel in that way. And it certainly does assume a certain knowledge of sin, as Anne points out. But I think, first of all, it puts forth that the non-material, capital N, and the supernatural, the other, seeks us. Helping somebody to consider beyond simply the material in the world does take an ongoing conversation. It takes a relationship, that evangelization that happens there. But I think that the Kerygma can also bring people to have the courage to look at God's invitation to participate in his divine life, and also that human sin is something that keeps us from that. that God eagerly forgives when we approach him with contrition and we confess our sins. So the question of how do people really ponder their separateness from sin, separateness from God, and sin there is a challenge, absolutely. And it's something that I know my kids who have come through, K through 12 in Catholic high school continue to ponder. They approach confession as part of their religious observance, which they do out of duty and love of God, but not necessarily out of internal conviction that there's something broken in our world and in our own lives.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess to agree with that, my sense from my students and from many, even when I go to other schools, I don't know that they have a clear idea of sin. I mean, they have a catechetical definition of it, but sin in the sense that there is something written in my heart that I should know and that I should respond to. I think a lot of the kids, sort of in the way you're putting it here, there are these obedience and dutiful. There are these things that the adults want me to buy into. But they look, there are all sorts of ways in which the natural law touches on their lives. If you ask them, what's the most important quality in a friend? A whole room full of juniors, high school juniors will tell you loyalty. You will hear that over and over. And I will point out to them, there is no such thing as being a loyal friend if you're not brave. You probably haven't thought this through, but the reason that a lot of people are not loyal, it's not that they don't like you enough. They may not have the inner toughness that allows them to be loyal. So you can feel as though it's an inadequacy on you, like they didn't like me enough, I'm not likable enough or something. But it could be just, no, they lack a moral quality which would allow them to stick with you when times are tough. They don't have a formation among themselves as peers and from the larger culture that allows them to identify those kind of moral realities that I think if you've been better formed and you're more mature, they just seem sort of obvious to you. But that's the world that our young people are growing.
Let me just push a little bit. Do you how do you integrate explicitly talking about Christ and what he has done for us into your theology program? Do you really just wait like Lewis does, or do you weave it into the conversation all the time?
I don't weave it into the conversation all the time because I just don't think they're in a position to hear it. So, yeah, I like Lewis, I kind of take my time building up to it, because otherwise it just becomes words without content. It has not. There's no reality for it to grasp onto.
I just feel, especially with the stuff going on today, there's so many opportunities because there really isn't any such thing as relativism, right? Because even relativists have a truth that they believe in,
Yeah, oh sure.
And to come at it from that angle, as opposed to just, like, that was my thing. Like, if they don't even believe in God, I mean, there's probably a lot of Catholics out there who really honestly don't believe in God, who he truly is.
Yeah.
And, they're just doing it out of, like you said, duty or whatever. But so I think it's like Lewis, the way he approaches it is perfect for that kind of thing. Like, they might not want to say it's the truth, but everybody has their opinions about what's right and wrong.
Sure, but the problem is getting those two things together. Mm-hmm. So, for example, some of my students who remember 2 years ago were the most hardcore about, there is no standard for human goodness, and they would go over to the history class when they were talking about the age of exploration, and they're wringing their hands about Columbus and Indian genocide and slavery and so on. And so when they would come over to my class, I would say, okay, which is it? You come over here and you say there's no law and there's no standard. And I talked to the history teacher, and he's telling you how it is that you think Columbus is a pirate and a corsair. And I was like, pick, because it's one or the other. So of course you're right that you can't, and this is a point that Lewis makes, you can't escape from moral judgments. The problem is, for a lot of our young people, they're going to keep making moral judgments, But since they don't have some kind of real standard that they think those judgments go back to, then they end up thinking that really opinion matters when you've got the power to enforce it. So, in other words, I'll give you this. This puts it so beautifully. I had a student who was really in favor of gay marriage, same-sex marriage. Big argument for that. And so after about a semester of the course, I asked her, okay, same-sex marriage is just. This is what we should allow. Now, would you say that's a fact, or would you say that's an opinion? And she thought about it, and she said, it's an opinion, but it's the right opinion. You see what she's done? Instead of being something that's based on a natural.
Arthur, I'm going to stop your video again.
What belongs to
Arthur, can you go back over the right opinion? Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, Arthur, can you go over that again?
That's what I. Sure. So that that if morality really is sort of the right opinions, if you like, of the right people, we don't really have morality anymore. We have the opinions of the powerful. We have the opinions of the elite. We have the opinions of the self-anointed. In other words, I want the right to declare good and bad, but I don't actually want to be accountable to defend or argue it, right? Morality simply becomes a fashion. And my concern is that that's where a lot of our young people are at, especially when they go to college. They are learning the moral, if you like, poses or moral attitudes of the important people. That's what it becomes.
Something that I have found helpful, at least for some conversations, is an understanding that the moral virtues don't come from the church. They come from pre-Christian thought, and that they help to identify what's involved in human happiness and living the good life. Yep. I find that can be a nice entry point into some of these conversations. It doesn't solve everything because there's still judgment in there, but.
Nope, we do that too. Yep, I would agree with you. That's why it is that some of these non-Christian things, like Aristotle's ethics or Plato's dialogues, that can be a helpful point of entry because they're reading somebody who's not Christian but is arguing that there are certain ways of being good. One thing that we've been using in recent years is Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. Viktor Frankl is somebody who's not, I think he is religious himself, but religion doesn't enter into what he's talking inside to, survive a place like Auschwitz. That's what Man's Search for Meaning, kind of the setting of it. That there has to be some kind of meaning or purpose for human beings. You're right. When you give them these things outside St. Francis de Sales and Teresa Lisieux and so on, it's like it gives it a kind of legitimacy. But the devout students get a lot out of it too. I remember teaching Man's Search for Meaning, having these two girls, that really just devout, lovely girls, and they're just vibrating as they're reading Viktor Frankl, because it affirms their own convictions about the importance of meaning.
Okay, we have one more question or comment. Are we good? Okay, well, thank you all for joining us for this first webinar in our Advanced Formation Summer Series. And it's great to see we have people from West Coast, East Coast, North, South, Canada, England. I hope we get as good a turnout for the rest of them. We are going to be having next week, Gregory Roper from the University of Dallas will be talking about Beowulf, and that'll be great. And then my personal favorite is going to be the Allie Barnes in 2 weeks talking about how grammar reveals reality. That's going to show who are the real nerds here, who are really into this. who are just playing around. So, all right. So thank you very much. Thank you so much, Dr. Hippler, for doing this. And hopefully we'll see
Thank
somebody.
you.
God bless.